So, hello, folks. We'll get back started here. We're really excited to be hosting these two just fantastic speakers. Winona Leduc is an internationally renowned activist working on issues of sustainable development, renewable energy, and food systems. She lives on the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota and is a two-time vice presidential candidate with Ralph Nader for the Green Party. Just a really inspiring activist and an important perspective to close out a day full of important perspectives. We also have Frank Vivo, who is an enrolled member of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, who's been living on Leech Lake Reservation in Ball Club, Minnesota, most of his life, half mile away from the Enbridge U.S. Highway 2 mainline corridor, the original Line 3. He works extensively with Chippewa treaty rights, civil rights, and sovereignty as an attorney on and off the reservation, and brought a really exciting and innovative legal case putting forward the rights of Manoomin, or wild rice. So we're going to hear from both of them today, and we're really excited to be hosting them here at the law school. Without any further ado, turn it over to Winona Leduc. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Minogiji good? Thank you very much for having myself and Frank. I'm going to kind of be his warm-up act. I'm his defendant in a bunch of these cases, and I'm just happy to be here to talk to a bunch of lawyers, and going to be lawyers because we need movement lawyers. A little of my history. I've spent most of my life doing movement work. I was raised by people who were active in the civil rights and the anti-war movement. So I don't know, I did it my whole life. And I started around 17, and my slew of arrests, though, was last year. That's where my arrest showed up, is on the Enbridge battle. And so I've been grateful to movement lawyers my whole life, from the American Indian movement lawyers to all the lawyers out of the Black Hills. And Frank and I have known each other, particularly through the rights of wild rice and the protection of wild rice, for about half our lives, I think. And because this is what we do, we're Anishinaabe people, and our instructions are to care for our water and care for our wild rice, because that's where we come from. Indakingamin, that means the land, the very land to which we belong. Aking, that means our land. And I just want to say that to you, because I know that American concepts of law and land ownership are a lot different than mine. And I think it's really important for law students to understand that the world is not necessarily in the American jurisprudence system. And indigenous legal paradigms and indigenous legal canons and indigenous thinking are actually much more prevalent around the world than what we got here. And so I just want to say that, because I'm looking at our land. So I'm just going to show you a few pictures, and then I'm just going to hand it over to Frank. But, this is a water protector, and I'm a water protector, as are about 1,000 people who got charged here in Minnesota. We're water protectors. We're not criminals. We're water protectors. And this woman is in downtown Duluth on 2nd Street and 2nd Avenue at the ICO building. And I always like to show her because indigenous women are often missing and murdered. Even in my own family, we lost people in the Mississippi River, so we all know that. And this woman's big and loud and proud. And there's more of us coming, and she's in downtown Duluth. I just want to show a couple of pictures of what it was like when America was great. That's when there were 50 million buffalo. That's when America was great. 10,000 varieties of corn, 250 different species of grass on the northern plains. You could drink the water from every lake and river. That's when America was great. When the sky was blackened with passenger pigeons. That's when it was. So I think that one of the challenges in America is that a lot of people have historic amnesia and ecological amnesia. They're looking at these scraps of ecosystems and corridors that we have left and bargaining them away. When indigenous people and people who've lived here a long time know that there used to be a grove of trees there, or that the water used to be clean there. And that is the standard to which I'm holding our society. Making things right, restorative economics and restorative ecological work and restorative legal systems. That's what Land Back is about. And so I'm going to hold us to that, because that's the right thing to do to make things right. This is our rice, Manoomin. And this is Don Goodwin and I at Rice Lake on the White Earth Reservation. This is one of the largest mother lodes of wild rice in our territory. There are a number of other great rice lakes in the North Country. This is the only place in the world wild rice grows. Doesn't grow anywhere else. And it is a part of our entire stories of our lives, our migration story, our sacred stories, and all of our teachings. And this is all I know is that we raced that same lake for 10,000 years. Didn't mess it up. That's what a durable and salient and sustainable economy looks like. You don't mess stuff up. America has no idea how to do that. Based on colonialism and manifest destiny, just keep messing stuff up, and we're kind of at the end of the party, frankly. The fossil fuels party, the industrial ag party, looks like the Republican Party too, quite frankly. Across the board, time to move along, into something that works. And so I'm here because I'd really like to have a working system. I like indigenous legal systems that work, and I like American legal systems that work. I think it's a fair thing to ask for in this country. First world and all should have some working systems. Quit lecturing everybody how to run their countries when you got such widespread regulatory capture in the state of Minnesota that you'd sell the state out for 7 million or maybe 14 million to a Canadian multinational. Shameful. And so I'm here because I'd like to see a working system. This is a little bit of our history of the conflict between two societies. Not new, historic. Someone's based on conquest and someone's based on survival. My simple suggestion is that it's time to live based on survival, not conquest. We're going to hang around another 500 years, if we're going to hang around another 100 years. We're going to have to rethink how we live from our legal institutions to our economic institutions. Times of climate change, this is a fire a couple years ago in Fort McMurray, but just pick the West this year. There you go. This is the time of catastrophes of biblical proportions and no idea what we're going to do to pay for them, right? And so this is where we are, and this is who we are. We're the people that have an opportunity to fix things. We're people who have an opportunity to clear up a river, to save a little brown bat in northern Minnesota from going extinct because some logging companies and some oil companies want their land. We're the people that have the ability to protect things. And humans are the ones that are responsible for messing it up, and humans are the ones that got to stand up and fix it. We have to transform our society and our legal systems. So this is kind of going to be towards the end of my speech, so I hope Frank's ready. Look, I refer to this as Wendigo capitalism, the economy of a cannibal. We could pretend that it's free market capitalism, but it's not free market capitalism. In fact, it's, entirely based on, the invisible hands names Enbridge, or maybe it's Exxon, or, maybe it's ADM, or maybe it's Monsanto. There's no invisible hand of Adam Smith. It's a bunch of corporate control of our country, a corporate control of so much. And it's also a society which is, insane in its behavior. We consume vast amounts of oil and energy, and we're addicts. We're addicts. I'm an addict myself, but at least I admit it. People act like it's normal to go ravage other countries and frack, down to the bedrock of Mother Earth, bust her up to get oil, or go to the tar sands. That's crazy stuff. That's late stage addiction behavior. And in my life of the past, since Standing Rock, I have seen what that looks like in the brutality on people and the cost on civil and human rights to Indigenous peoples and to all of us. And that's how addicts don't make good decisions. And what we're doing in the state of Minnesota is basically letting dealers make decisions for us. Dealers like Enbridge determine which way things should go, or maybe Minnesota Power, or maybe the latest bid for Huber, the big logging destruction in the north. For what? A Southern corporation going to come and clear cut the North Woods for some OSB in an outdated, toxic system that shouldn't even be here. What we need is real leadership and real vision. But this is Standing Rock. This is what $38 million worth of military will buy you. This is what surplusing military equipment to civilian police forces will buy you. Bunch of big equipment that shouldn't be used in North Dakota on civilian populations. This is America defending oil companies from indigenous people. And this is what, it basically looks like. And I could show you this map, and y'all know these maps. This is the first proposal for the Dakota Access Pipeline just north of the mostly white city of Bismarck. And then the second, the approved route going right north of the Standing Rock Reservation. There's not a single example that is not like that. It is so common. It is so common. That's what environmental racism looks like. That's what a violation of treaty rights looks like. That's what it should not look like in this country. And this is what it looks like on the ground. Of course, this is my favorite is the Indian people on horseback, But, and then there's line 3. So I spent the last 8 years of my life fighting Enbridge. I didn't even know anything about them until about 9 years ago when I was up in Alberta giving a lecture at the university, and a woman named Ariel Deranger said, "Hey, come with me. There's a meeting on Enbridge's Northern Gateway Pipeline." So I went in, and Enbridge had proposed then a pipeline known as the Northern Gateway to go to the Pacific Northwest, crossing a whole bunch of reserves, native territories in the north, and a bunch of mountains and a bunch of rivers, so this was a hearing. And I walked into that hearing, and I didn't really know much about it. I didn't know much about the project, and the Indian people were in there, and then there was the Canadian government representatives and the Enbridge Corporation, a bunch of white guys, and then some Indians. Story of my life, And there, those Indian people are go in there, and I hear them say, "We can't drink the water in our village anymore. We have to go to Calgary to get water." That's what they said. Another one said that the beavers went all crazy because there was an oil spill, and that the company sent them in to clean it up with chainsaw pants. It was egregious. It was egregious. And that's what it's like in the deep north, which is northern Minnesota too. They get away with all kinds of stuff because it's Native people. And the state of Minnesota, and certainly the Canadian government, has no regard for Native people. That's quite obvious with the residential schools and the genocidal policies of the Canadian government, let alone this government and the Walz administration. I got myself a PhD in white privilege this last couple of years, So this is what it's like being on the front lines. Enbridge never did get its Northern Gateway pipeline. They didn't. It was the National Energy Board of Canada didn't approve their line. They also didn't approve Energy East, another really insane pipeline that was going from the tar sands to New Brunswick. Then Keystone, that one also got canceled, right? That leaves 2 pipelines, Line 3 and the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I refer to that one as Trudeau West. That's the one he paid, I don't know, I can't even remember how much, $20 billion or something to put in a pipeline to send tar sands oil to the Pacific Northwest. Just remember that a lot of this is also about exports, right? The United States exports, last I saw, it's like 8 million barrels, 8 million gallons a day. Huge amount of exports. So how's that work? How's that work? Why are we doing this, So this is us last year up at Line 3. This is what it looks like when you prostitute the police of the state of Minnesota for Enbridge. I think it was it $6 or $7 million worth of police?
Oh, at least.
Yeah. And, we were waiting to see what the Highway Patrol got and the DNR. This was at the Capitol. But this here was our driveway. This is a driveway that the Ginu Water Protector Camp in Hubbard County had a driveway, has a piece of land that our organization gave them in 2019, I think. But the driveway, it turns out that the easement for the driveway, the county claimed was theirs, but I had the title to it. And I had given that to Tara Hauska, who was the director of the GNU, as a, because we worked together. Well, anyway, one day the county says, we're going to just block you in because it's no longer, I pulled up and they said, "This is not a driveway. This is a path." I said, "No, it's a driveway. It's my driveway." So this is what it looks like, and the court did rule against the police in this case. You can't block citizens into their driveway, but this is what it looks like when you prostitute the deep north. And just to be clear, the police in Hubbard County don't like Indians anyway. The arrest rates. I think I was there when we were like 38% of the people in jail, or 2% of the population. Does that sound about right? So these cases that kind of came to light in line 3, where they saw the repression of water protectors, just really, more than surveillance, but a lot of brutality and a lot of unnecessary activities. Because they were all financed, there's all kind of cappuccinos Enbridge paid for, all kind of boots for the highway patrol, or no, I think the DNR all got new boots, all kind of like special weapons, all kind of special training for tactical and non-lethal chemical dispersals and rubber bullets. So honestly, I'm 62. I hung out a lot around the world. That sounds kind of third world to me when a Canadian multinational finances your police force to put in a project over the wishes of indigenous people. Could have been Honduras or maybe El Salvador, Guatemala. Not that different, not very adult Tim Waltz, to let him run us over like that. And then to do that, these citizens that are supposed to protect us are now protecting a Canadian multinational at our expense. Wrong. This is who they're charging. People that you definitely need truncheons and rubber bullets for, right? Bunch of cool people, valiant people. And this is my arrest on the Shell. I was arrested with 6 other women, and the 1855 Treaty Authority appointed me the guardian of the Shell River, rights of nature. I live at the top of the river. I live on Shell Acre. I've lived by that lake most of my life. And here, this river is crossed 5 times by Enbridge, 5 times. And during the deepest drought of this last summer, I saw the water levels go 8 inches down in one day. And I also saw the irrigators of RDO Offutt, the giant polluting potato monster of Minnesota, sucking 24/7 water out of deep wells next to the river. So it's not just one corporation. It's the regulatory capture of the Department of Agriculture, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, the DNR, the widespread prostitution of what should be, state and public resources, or native resources in this case, for multinationals, So we tried to get them to protect the river, tried everything, including when they allocated 5 billion gallons of water, the majority of it coming out of this river system, during the deepest drought in my life in the state of Minnesota. 5 billion gallons of water without a single hearing, and was for $150 because it was just a modification of their permit. That's wrong. It's entirely wrong. And then we told them that the river, that the mussels in the river were dying. The single largest mussel population in the upper Mississippi River is on the Shell River right there. I said, you're going to kill these guys off. The DNR wouldn't, we asked the Department of Natural Resources to send us up a malacologist. I had to learn that name. That's a mussel guy. They were really nice. They all wanted to come up, but then they got closed down from the top. Said it wasn't a priority. First they said a couple weeks out, month out, and then they said, well, not considered a priority. They closed us down. I was calling upon them to protect the mussels of the state of Minnesota in the deepest drought in the history, watching irrigation wells pull it down and Enbridge coming and sucking water right out of that river. DNR guarded that river while Enbridge sucked water out of the river for their drills. Same thing, I saw it on the Mississippi River, and I was there when they had a frack out on the Willow. I spent most of last year face-to-face with cops almost every day in DNR. It's just egregious what they did. And they would not do anything. And so then our tribe and the 1855 Treaty Authority found a malacologist who was permitted to study the well-being of mussels in these rivers. We contracted him to come to this river. He submitted his plan to the DNR. And then the DNR said he had a permit that was his permit was not valid for that river. It was valid for other rivers, but just not the Shell. So my tribe coughed up this permit, and then 2 days later, I think it was about 2 days later, that the DNR coughed up a permit for him. across the board mismanagement in the state of Minnesota. Just egregious what they've done to us and done to our river. So at this point, we're over there. It took us about four hours to get arrested. And those are some of my kids, my grandkids, and some of my nieces and nephews. We camped there in the summer, and we'd welcome you back. We're going to do some more camping up there on the Shell City campground, if you want to get out and about. Beautiful campground, horse camp too, so we liked it, But I was charged with, Frank, when was I charged with? Trespass against critical infrastructure.
That's the main one.
That's
There's
the main
about 4
one.
or 5 charges.
4 or 5 charges, yeah. I got a couple sets of 4 or 5 charges. But, the questions are, is this really critical public infrastructure? No. This is private Canadian multinational infrastructure. I don't have a way to get on there, get some public oil off. You know what I'm saying? It's not a public, This is a Canadian multinational shoving its way through our territory. So that's what I'm charged with. And Frank, being my attorney, will speak more about my charges, I'm sure, and the charges of other water protectors like myself. But, my point is basically is that I'm not the criminal. Enbridge is the criminal. The DNR is the criminal. We have said many times that the water protectors, our charges should be dropped. Our charges should be dropped. In fact, we should get medals for protecting the state of Minnesota. That's what we should all get. Charges should be dropped. So this is what I'm going to hold us to, this higher, the way it should be in this state, the way it should be in the land. If we want to build any kind of a multicultural democracy, if we want to build a democracy that acknowledges and its treaty agreements with peoples, takes care of Indak Kingamin, the very land to which we belong, our problems are not just our problems. Enbridge's pipelines, it's the single largest tar sands importer into the country. 75% of the tar sands, dirtiest oil in the world, come through Enbridge. They have 6 pipes in northern Minnesota, and those pipes go through Wisconsin, over to Lake Michigan. In Enbridge 5.0, that's what we call this, the Line 5 battle. The Bad River Reservation, Anishinaabe people have pointed out that Enbridge no longer has an easement. I think they haven't had one since 2013. And they said that Enbridge needs to remove their pipe because the tribe did not renew their easement. And so Enbridge has sued them in court. But, the trespass is pretty clear. You don't have an easement, buddy. And rather than address that, and so what they've done is this dotted line is the new proposed route, which is almost geologically impossible to get through. But, it's a giant and very expensive problem for Enbridge that we intend to make a bigger problem. Because there is no reason that this Canadian multinational should hold us hostage, which is what they're doing. They've held the state of Minnesota hostage, said the pipe's going to break. You need to let us build a new pipe because things are going to blow up. I'm like, clean up your mess, close her down. We aren't even using the oil here. And it turns out we don't need all that oil. And projected demands are lower. Because, we're all going to be driving F-150s that are electric pretty soon, or, anything that is not run on fossil fuels. That's the future, not these guys. And then this is their spills. Bad track record. Why would you give those guys anything? Right? 800 spills. I'm like, are y'all high over there at the Capitol? And then this is what it looks like under the Straits of Mackinac, where Enbridge has a 63-year-old pipeline that is looks like that and got hit by an anchor last summer. It's like a time bomb waiting to go off. The governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, did not renew their easement under the Straits of Mackinac and said, your easement is up and I'm going to collect your royalties. I'm going to collect your profits since May 13th of last year. That I'm sure is still in litigation, but my point is that the stories that we're telling you are not unique to us. It's the problem of I think of it as late stage fossil fuel addiction, you know, but it could be also just the, continuing insanity of a Wendigo economy. This is the brought to you by Tesla Green Mining Project. We just protected Sandy Lake from the pipeline. We fought like hell to get the pipeline moved out of the Sandy Lake watershed. And then they put this in it. This is not an answer. I mean, it's kind of like last year's technology. The fact is that electric, batteries and storage are moving away from these minerals. And the fact is that there's more of these minerals in like the landmines. I mean, the landfills that we have, But what we're working in, and hard battles in the state of Minnesota over the twin metals and polymet, right? And really congratulations to the people who fought that. So what's the point of this? It's like, should we spend the rest of our life fighting stupid ideas that the Waltz administration approves? Or should we have some kind of an economy that's not based on destroying an ecosystem, arresting a bunch of people? If you're going to arrest that many people and have so many police, it's probably not a good idea, Tim, right? I'm all ready for the next economy, the local food, renewable energy, local solar, don't ship stuff so far around, manufacture it local economy, that one, based on wild rice and water. That's a good economy. And then there's this project, the Huber Project. That is a 12-story high, like 100 football fields in size project of an OSB plant, oriented strand-bird plant, to replace Minnesota Power's dirty coal-fired generators in Cohasset. Their green plan, this is called a green plan, is to put up an OSB plant that is, heated on its own refuse, right? Well, what about the carbon footprint of taking down, all those trees every year? 400,000, cords of wood. What about that carbon footprint, right? What about that of destroying forests and fragmenting habitat? What about the carbon footprint of all the discharge into the air of toxins that come from an OSB plant, right? What if we just did something like a hemp wood plant? That's what I'm ready for. It's hemp. I'm a hemp farmer. Just came back from the big hemp conference, the big national hemp conference. And, Minnesota used to have 11 hemp mills. And take about 1,000 acres to put up a hemp plant that would produce a hemp wood plant that would produce a heck of a lot of OSB out of hemp, leave our forests intact. That's what I'm saying is I'm ready for the next economy, because we're going to spend the rest of our lives fighting stupid ideas. And you guys are going to figure out how to stall these projects until they go bankrupt. That's your job. Because they are going to go bankrupt. They're bad ideas and they're expensive ideas. And, we need a lot of lawyers. And there's all kind of Indian people that are mad as heck about this project. And we're just getting started, But the thing is that we shouldn't have to spend all of our lives fighting stupid ideas. What we really want is some way to make a society that is based not on conquest, but on survival. It's based, as I said, on local food and energy. It's based on some acknowledgement and respect of restorative ways of thinking, including indigenous, And, so I feel like the next couple of years is cut out for most of our team up north, and we'd really appreciate some support in fighting these bad projects. But also we're, as our people face more jail time, help us out. We're not criminals. We need movement lawyers, And aside from that, it's really my assessment, and I think a lot of people's assessment, that the future is green. That's our prophecies, a choice between a scorched path and a green path. And, I want to have systems that work, and I want to protect our water and our land. And we need a lot of lawyers now for all the people charged in those northern counties. And I'll tell you what, is we're going to need some long-term civil rights lawyers in the north, because the cronyism and corruption of the deep north is widespread. And it's racist and it's illegal what they're doing. I mean, the Cohasset City Council was listed as the responsible unit of government to approve this mill after they put in $12 million and they got $80 million from the state of Minnesota and an exemption from an EIS. 1,200 people in the city of Cohasset. They have no ability to assess the environmental impact of this project it's a mile from the Leech Lake Reservation. And in a meeting that was noticed publicly, that's to say we are told we could testify in public. What was that, a couple weeks ago?
Yep.
We all showed up, all smiley and ready to testify in public, and they refused, they closed down public testimony. They didn't let anybody testify.
They said that the people who were residents of the city could testify, but nobody else.
And then they closed that down. They wouldn't let, I mean, because Annie and I were going in, we're old residents.
Right.
We was like, we's a pre-city, we're pre-Cohasset residents.
Yeah.
But that's the point, it's like, I mean, it was like there's a public meeting noticed, and then they denied anybody the ability to testify at a public meeting. And it seems like there should be some law, which I think there is in Minnesota, that says you got to have a public meeting. When you say you're going to have a public meeting, you don't just get to close it down because a bunch of brown people showed up. Just a flagrant display of racism. Really amazing. I was in the front row, trying to ask my questions and stop them. I did not cause a riot, but I was like, unbelievable, guys. They are so racist. But anyway, listen, I want to thank you for letting us talk. And, we're here to talk about the rights of Mother Earth and the rights of Manoomin, which is really the longer term solution to these issues. Whether it is Ecuador, which declared the rights of Mother Earth in 2008, or Bolivia in 2010, the Ho-Chunk Nation, the Nez Perce Nation, the Yurok Nation, and the White Earth Nation, we all recognize the rights of Mother Earth. New Zealand recognized the rights of Mother Earth, right? And in December of last year, the Ecuadorian Constitutional Court overthrew the rights of a Canadian mining corporation and a Ecuadorian mining corporation to mine in a protected area, acknowledging and reaffirming the rights of Mother Earth to that land. And so that is where the future is, as to say that legal systems change. Slavery was legal. Women didn't have a right to vote. Of course they did in our community, and it's up to you to help change the law, make it work. So, Miigwech, thank you for your time, and I'm the warm up for the lawyer. Thanks.
All right. Good afternoon. Sorry for being a little bit late, but as the attorney in all of this craziness, not the only attorney, you got to have a few attorneys to keep up with Winona. But just to go backward for a moment in the rights of Manoomin, and I'll try to think about this more as law students, because I do talk to law students in different places. But so today I was filing a motion for reconsideration at the White Earth Tribal Court of Appeals, because in our struggle for rights of Manoomin, where our tribal court ruled in our favor and the Minnesota federal courts ruled in our favor, and we're waiting at the 8th Circuit, the White Earth Tribal Court of Appeals dismissed our case and said DNR can go home. And we were very surprised to have the home team do that to us. And their order was very odd, and I could share the motion to reconsider because we've got it filed now, but they didn't follow the normal rules of court. And I say the normal rules, who knows what those are. But if you appeal something at the MPCA, you have to go to the Minnesota Court of Appeals and then the Minnesota Supreme Court, and they talk about what Minnesota law says and what they think about it. And for whatever reason, our tribal court of appeals speculated as to what the federal court might say about our case. And basically it was said that there was no case law against what we were doing, but they still speculated against our case. The DNR couldn't find any immunity at the federal court. The judge asked DNR, show me in the law where it says I have the right to tell the tribe that they can't take you to court. The DNR had no answer. Our appellate court should have waited a couple of weeks, I think. But, you know, it's really weird how the law works and doesn't work. Who knows what, how well you explain things. Was your complaint written right? Was your TRO written right? What happens? So you just keep going on. We should be okay. It's just a little bit of a shock. I'm not concerned because I've already seen what the federal court has said. And it's always very interesting. Is it anybody in here studying Indian law at all? No? You are? Okay. Well, I would tell you, if you take Indian law and practice it a while, you'll know more about the law than any other kind of law that you study, because you have to understand how all the other laws work that are impacting your rights, because they don't consider your rights. So when you work as the tribal attorney on a reservation, you're like the attorney general for a state. And you need to know what all the people under you are doing too, because sometimes they don't know what they're doing. And you have to be able to step in and fix those things too. So it's an odd job, but it makes you more prepared. And I talk about that for a little bit because one of the reasons we're where we are now is because we could see what was happening at Standing Rock. And so back in about 2016, 2015, I can't remember now, it's quite a while ago now, but I went out there. I used to be using canes and stuff. I couldn't hardly get around. I've had double hip replacement surgery. And so I went out after everything happened as a forensic audit, a forensic legal audit, to see what went wrong in Indian country, because things shouldn't go wrong in Indian country. And that's what I'm working on here. But unfortunately, the Sioux are very oppressed people. They don't trust exercising their rights off reservation because they usually get hurt for it. And they get hurt, at Standing Rock. So I went out there to see what had happened. I could see that by talking to people, especially the chief judge, Mike Swallow, at the Standing Rock court, that probably wasn't going to do anything retroactively, even though our laws can work that way. And so what I did was I tried to think about preparing for KXL as well. And what I noticed in North and South Dakota is that both of those states tried to get jurisdiction over the Indians back in the 60s under what we call here in Minnesota Public Law 280. But when Public Law 280 came out, it was an overreach, and that's just how it was back in the 50s, because it was the termination era. And so by the time those states tried to get control over us, the Indian Civil Rights Act was in the works in 1968, and the regular Civil Rights Act of 1964 was in the works. So Congress realized that they couldn't just continue to grant other states jurisdiction over us, and that those states had to get the consent of the Indians to be governed. And when that Supreme Court ruled in 1973 in that case that you got to get our consent, every state stopped even asking, because they knew what the answer was. Galween, here's my one finger wave to you. So what does that mean? Well, we didn't know what it meant. I mean, it was 1973. We're trying to figure things out. We didn't even have tribal courts then. And so we've been trying to evolve understanding what the laws have been against us. And that's a hard way to understand, because it always keeps you in the box. And we don't like to be in the box. And if you're working with Winona, there is no box. So you have to start thinking just broadly about the landscape. And so when I was out there, I developed two things that I was hoping to use out there. One was called the right to travel, use, and occupy traditional lands and waters. And I did that because their treaties are different than our treaties in the sense that it was so much plains that they talk about the right to travel, use, and occupy, because they had the right to exclude everybody in their original treaties. We're woodland people, we're people of the canoe, the water goes everywhere and everybody goes everywhere in their boats and things. And so we didn't think about how you could restrict people from water access. So we don't have that kind of concept in our treaties, but we still enjoyed the right to travel. Our highways, our rivers were the roads that everybody used. And so we really had control of the highways. We never thought about denying control of the highways or excluding or reducing or whatever those things meant. And so maybe we should have. So we had that, and part of what that does, just to give you an idea, I included UNDRIP in there for UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples. One of the concepts I included was fire, because there were, I think, 8 or 9 tribal members at Standing Rock who were charged with fire. And when I came into the group of public defenders who weren't working Indian country, and they told me that, and I said, well, how did those Indians get charged? And because they were in federal court. They looked at me and said, well, how do you know they're Indians? I said, because only Indians go to federal court. The white people go to Bismarck. And so the attorneys aren't prepared to think about how our rights and how we can intersect on those things. So Winona, was trying to get me to do Rights of a River, and that's popular in a lot of places. And I think I could do it now, but Minnesota probably has, I'm going to say 20 water controls on the upper Mississippi River. And it's the U.S. Army that controls it, the Army Corps of Engineers. We've been fighting them forever, and we can't get control of our water. Nobody has been able to get control of their own water in any big sense. And so I couldn't really see how to get control of the water. But then one day Winona, and I don't know if it was frustration, but she said, well, what about rights of wild rice or Manoomin? Well, as an attorney, that made it easy because in our 1837 treaty, it says that we have the right to hunt, fish, and gather wild rice in the lands, rivers, and lakes that are being surrendered in the ceded territory. That was the template that told us that we can go everywhere and harvest. Now, to go back on the law side, because you're maybe going to practice law. Not everybody in it. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So we have 44 treaties with the United States. In 1825, we had a treaty that established a boundary from Michigan to essentially North Dakota. Those places didn't really exist then. And it said north of that boundary, the Chippewa decide who hunts, and south of that boundary, the Sioux would primarily decide. There were other tribes involved, but that's essentially what the treaty said. And so that's really the first level of environmental regulation in your territory. Now, we didn't have very many Chippewa at that treaty session, and so we asked for a ratification session that happened the following year in 1826. It happened at Old Fond du Lac, which is right at the mouth of the St. Louis River right there in Lake Superior at Duluth. And at that treaty session, the primary language that I focus on says two things. Title to the land has not changed because we didn't sell at that point. And then the second thing it says is that we retain jurisdiction. Now, that's not an old Indian word. That's a word that white people use to tell other white people we have the right to decide. That's pretty simple language to try to convey, but you want to make sure because the United States wanted to buy land from us. Whoever was on one side of the boundary not fighting. They wanted that fair market value kind of a deal where you're buying it from the bona fide owner. So they were looking at this puzzle a little differently, so we weren't going to squabble over what land was whose. But at the same time, they had to let other people know, because of the Louisiana Purchase and things, that the United States wanted to get all of this land. They wanted to be in control. So you end up with treaties with us up here because of the weather like today, where they couldn't come in and just take us. We're used to the cold weather. They made peace treaties with us. They made trade treaties with us. And so our treaties are much more powerful than a lot of the other treaties that a lot of tribes have that have been pushed out west and pushed into submission and stuff. And it's very sad in that way. But we think we can still use our rights to help other people because they have the reserved rights doctrine. If you didn't surrender it, well, then maybe you still have it. So maybe you still have all those rights. You just didn't talk about it at treaty time, because what the Mille Lacs decision says is that treaties are to be understood the way the Indians would have understood them at the time of the treaty. We wouldn't have understood pipelines. We wouldn't have understood dams. We wouldn't have understood a bunch of things that have happened to our environment. And so we still don't understand those things. So what do? So rights in Manoomin is really a water rights kind of a case in a sense, or a law, because Manoomin is a keystone indicator species in the environment. And if it's not successful, and if it's having problems, then it means the whole environment is. And so that makes it really important. But wild rice is also in the treaty, so it's the supreme law of the land. And so that makes it interesting. And because we're in Minnesota, people know what wild rice is. A lot of people kind of know that Indians are tied to wild rice. And so it draws a different kind of an attention, and they can see we're trying a different solution. And so when we filed against the DNR probably should have filed sooner. And maybe I'll stop on that for a second. I'll come back to it. Before we filed against the DNR, all of you guys, 20, 30 years from now when you're older, will be the same people who tried to stop me from going first with my rights in Manoomin case because they said, you can't do that stuff. It doesn't exist. We're going through the PCA. We're going through the DNR. We're doing contested case proceedings. We went through 8 years of what the state laws and the federal laws are. To this day, we have litigation against the Corps of Engineers from December of 2020 for not doing an EIS on line 3. We thought we got lucky when we got the judge who ruled against the pipeline in Standing Rock. She was the one who said, turn off that pipeline. You didn't have a good EIS, and clean it out, and we're going to look and see what's going on. Enbridge gave them the finger, and they're still pumping oil. Bad River, their leases expired 8-9 years ago. They're still pumping oil. Red Lake, leases haven't been in place for 40 years. They're still pumping oil because you can't make them stop very easily. So the mechanisms that most mainstream people exist and work through, they don't work anymore. They don't work for us. They don't work for anybody, you know? So as you come forward, you try to figure out what can you do that's different, that might make a difference, because obviously the judge doesn't know what she can do that's different, because otherwise she'd say, this pipeline's wrong too, turn it off, you don't have an EIS, and clean it out. But that didn't work. So the judge can't even make the law work. Now that's pretty scary. Why, to use a local term, why waste your time? You know, I went through law school to figure out how and why the law didn't work for us. I found out why the law doesn't work for us, and we've been oppressed, not able to use our rights in the way that we should. So as we come forward, part of what Rights in Manoomin also did was created a document where we have the right to defend wild rice because it's part of our spirituality. And that kind of connects it to that First Amendment, which is kind of goofy. And then you have the American Indian Religious Freedoms Act that nobody knows what to do because the Supreme Court said it's unenforceable, but yet it gets enforced in a lot of places. But it gets enforced by Indians. That's who it gets enforced by. And so you try to figure out what laws can you enforce and do they have any meaning? So as we got all the other appeals done, except for the one with the Corps of Engineers, I was able to go forward. DNR did that 5 billion gallon outrageous permit. And so we filed against them. And the first thing DNR said was, you know, you can't do that. We have sovereign immunity. And as an Indian law student and a practitioner and things now, one of the things that's unique about Indian law, besides, and I'll just tell you quickly how you think it is, we have parallel use of your mainstream laws. But when the Constitution was created, it said Indians not taxed. It said treaties, supreme law of the land. And so we run parallel to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so those amendments on the Bill of Rights, aside from the 14th Amendment that says Indians not taxed, they don't exactly apply to us. We can apply them to other people, but they don't apply to us. And so the DNR was trying to say that they have sovereign immunity under the 11th Amendment. All right. Does anybody know what the 11th Amendment is? Any interaction here? Uh-huh. You guys, you're terrible. All right. It wasn't meant to be a test, but it's Friday afternoon. So the 11th Amendment basically says that citizens of a state can't sue their state or another state. Well, you know, we weren't citizens then. We weren't made citizens until 1924. That law doesn't apply to us. And so when they went to the federal court, that's why the federal court wanted to know, what law can you point to? There isn't one. And so a lot of the other Indian tribes are seeing this as well. And so the city of Seattle is being sued right now by the Sauk Seattle tribe because they have 3 dams that they own for power and light that are blocking the salmon from getting upstream to their reservation. You know, there's I don't know if I can say that right, the Totoonum?
Total.
Yeah. They're doing rights of the squirrel cactus because that's what's important to them in the middle of the desert. And so you have to figure out what is your primary treaty food. Well, wild rice is number 1. And when they went through the treaty journals, number 2 is maple and fish. And so if we didn't have wild rice, which I'm glad we do because it's, you know, supreme law of the land with the treaty, we would have to do rights of fish also. And I don't know how well it would work initially, but rights of fish will be taking over. You'll be seeing rights of fish everywhere with tribes because everybody knows what a fish looks like. They don't know what wild rice looks like. They know what it looks like on a plate when they're about to eat it. They don't know what it looks like in the water. They don't know a lot of those pieces, but everybody knows what a fish looks like. Everybody knows at least what a goldfish looks like in a little bowl. And everybody knows what that little goldfish looks like when it's dead. And everybody knows what a dead fish is. And so when you see 1,000 dead fish by the shore, everybody goes, there's something wrong with that water. It's that quick. You don't need science. What you need is an indicator species that's an immediate barometer. And that's what you can rely on. And that's what you're trying to protect. If you can protect the fish, you can protect the water, you can protect a lot of things. And so out in the Dakotas, they were trying to get control of the water, and they even wrote it into their constitution that we have control of the water. Well, they don't. It's still in their constitution. Everybody out there is relying on land rights primarily. And land, we don't have much of anymore. We don't have the good land. We don't have the good land by the water, by the lakes, but we have those rights. And the water is actually a better right for us than it is, in a sense, to have all the land, because we don't have all the land, but the water is something that we have. And in Minnesota, it's riparian. And so what that means is two things. One is there's only three parties that have a right to that, say that they have a right to that water. And that's us, the feds, who we made a treaty with, and then whatever the feds gave the state. None of you have a property right in water. None of you. And so none of you would even have standing in our tribal court under that law. And so I've intentionally excluded who can even try to sue us under our law by making it so that you have to have standing with water. You know, you have to think about all these things ahead of time. And so one of the things that's happened with the rights of Manoomin and with the right to travel, with the water protectors who have been charged, the tribal water protectors, because Claire has to work with the non-Indians and everybody else, but we were able to make it so that the judge, they got a special judge that came in, a senior judge, understand how our property works. Treaty rights are property under the federal Constitution. It requires due process, and it requires Congress to abrogate or change our treaty rights. So it hasn't been done in a long time. It hasn't ever been done in a lot of ways. And so I'm using old ancient law because it's the new stuff that'll trip you up and people can change. They can't change the treaties. They can't change our rights to travel. They can't change a bunch of the stuff that I'm using. And that trips them up. And so now all the tribal water protectors, except for one county, have transferred all of the tribal water protectors to White Earth Reservation to have their cases dealt with there, because trespass is really civil. And not only is it civil, but the state of Minnesota criminalized being a trespasser on public land. So that's how they criminalize trespass in a public place where the pipeline's going. And then if you're breaking that law, well, then you could be a nuisance or unlawful gathering or an unlawful gathering, or they got these little concepts that they've employed that violate all of your normal civil rights.
There's attendance at unlawful assembly and unlawful assembly.
Right.
That's my charge is one of them.
Right. And so you wonder, how can they even criminalize your civil rights? Well, the funny thing is, because of the way our treaty rights work, we still have technically the right to hunt, fish, and gather across everything. But what they said in the Mille Lacs decision was your first primary spot is all the public lands and waters, not the private held property. And so we're still working our way through that. And they said, once you've exhausted those resources, then you can start looking at private people's property. We haven't gotten to that place yet, and we may never get to that place. But it's really interesting how these laws work. So if it's a property right to have treaty rights, and you're on your property where your property exists, how can you be a trespasser? And trespass is a necessary element under criminal law to say that you're a nuisance or at an unlawful assembly, because you're at a place you're allowed to be. It kind of disrupts the system. Now, this is what I wanted to use at Standing Rock, but it was hard for them to understand. So we've been able to deploy it here fairly well, except for Aiken County. But see, Aiken County down there between Fond du Lac and all, that's the place where the Talon mine is. Aiken County wants to still, abuse Indians as water protectors in their county. Aiken County was part of the Mille Lacs decision. They got res judicata, collateral estoppel. Yeah, it's terrible.
Not as bad as Mille Lacs, though.
Or Hubbard, though. Hubbard's pretty bad, too. Yeah. So we could tell you those pieces, but they want to be prepared for the mines when the water protectors show up. And they're finding out that they can't use their laws against us. Well, if they can't use those kinds of laws against us, then they're going to be open for probably civil rights damages, 1981, 92, 83, you can go down the list. And so when Winona was talking about all these cops getting paid, there are counties who have tried to get paid for doing the prosecution, and Hubbard was one of the first ones. Hubbard was a terrible abuser. And so the PUC and Enbridge didn't give him any money. And I think it's because of 1983 claims that are going to come up next, because if they start funding the prosecution as well, who should be the gatekeeper, then I think they're open. They're open all the way to the top and the bottom. And so that spot that Winona was talking about with that road, that property was something like, 1910 or something like that. I can't remember. It's a really old piece of property, and people put a trail through part of the property, and then they had land that was turned into tax forfeit land, and they were trying to make, and they did. They made Winona buy an easement to that parcel, and it was like $750 or something like that. And then that parcel was transferred to Terra. And normally, all that stuff, for those of you who love property law, that kind of thing, that easement would follow the property because it goes with that property. But that's not what Hubbard was doing. Now, my version of what happened, and it's close to what Winona said, but I think the sheriff and the land zoning guy were out at a bar at Sunday night until they spent enough time to write a little notice. And then on Monday morning, about 8 o'clock, the sheriff went out with this notice and said, you're in violation of X, Y, and Z, and we could come in and get you. Within about 4 hours, they did. Now, the sheriff can't write the notice, and you got to maybe have a little bit more authority behind you. The sheriff shouldn't be delivering the notice and then enforcing the notice. It looks a little authoritarian, but that's what happened. And so as a result, the judge, and I hadn't even used any of my other concept I'm about to talk about, but the judge said, hey, these people have a right. They have an easement. And not only do they have a right to that easement to enjoy it, but so do their invited guests. And that's what we call the non-Indian water protectors, our invited guests, because they're at our property helping us defend our property. The state doesn't like that one either. But I can tell you that there's groups that want to develop these concepts for, future defense for water protectors and other kinds of events. And so we're at the front line of all of these kinds of logic and defense. And as long as we can protect part of the people, my belief is, and I've seen it here in Minnesota, I believed it would have happened in North Dakota, that if you can't prosecute the Indians, they're not so hard on the other white people. They made a lot better deals with a lot of the water protectors because it doesn't look right if you're really abusive and other people aren't being abused at the same time. So it's kind of this really weird dynamic. Now I'm going to tell you another little piece, and I can stop or let Winona talk some more. So KXL was a little different, and KXL was going through Rosebud. Rosebud is what we call a checkerboard reservation, and it's probably about the saddest kind of a story because we still have our territory that we can still go on and off reservation and things. But out there, the United States didn't buy their land at the beginning outright like they did with us. And they made it open to homesteading, and so the homesteaders could go and pick places, and then they were supposed to buy those places and give the money to the county recorder, and then money would go to Washington, and eventually it was going to get to the Indian. It didn't really get to the Indian, and the best spots where the water was, where the lakes were, the rivers were, where the trees were, places out of the wind, they were the first ones scooped up, and the Indians are living in the tough spots that are left on their own reservation. And so KXL, like they were trying to do through Minnesota, was trying to dodge the reservations, but we have off-reservation rights, but getting the state to understand it and agree and follow federal laws isn't easy. But one of the things that Rosebud was doing that they didn't understand, and again, this is all new thinking, so it's okay for your brethren to not know. So NARF was representing them. And, I looked online, and I had to explain essentially to the Indians that live there that they can't cross your reservation because you have primary water jurisdiction. And it's a concept you don't hear too much about primary water jurisdiction. And so what happens is inside their box, there's 5 counties, and they were providing all the fresh drinking water to all 5 counties, 4 of them unilaterally and 1 of them in cooperation with that county. Now, that's a consensual relationship under Montana as well. But so what it meant was they were taking water from the Ogallala Aquifer and from the reservoir at Ahi. And so they were using essentially Indian water to service them. And so when I explained to them that you have primary water jurisdiction, all of a sudden that pipeline came to a stop because they were going across a type of territory they were unfamiliar with because they all thought they could get by with land ownership. Water is another concept. And so I find water a better tool right now because I can't get all the land. I can't defend all the land, And so the water protectors were where the pipeline crossings were, and that's where all the damage has been done. And so unfortunately for us, fortunate for Line 5, is we've also had what we call thermal imaging flyover. And we had that last Thanksgiving. And the basic concept is when the temperature gets really cold, down to about, 30, then the water that comes out of the ground is about 45. And so wherever there's any aquifers that have been breached that are still leaking, or maybe some of the punctures from the frac outs that might have springs and things, the water, you can tell where it's leaking. We found a bunch of anomalies on this corridor. Now, DNR, they know that we've got this stuff and that we're working on it. So they came out right away and said, hey, there's 3 aquifer breaches out there, and we're investigating and we're going to do something. Well, they all happened months ago, if not a year ago. So they're not a little fast on. They just want to look like when we come out and say, hey, you ain't been doing your job. They're going to say, oh, of course we have. But they haven't been. And so that data shows probably 6 more aquifer breaches. And it shows a whole bunch of anomalies. And we've started to collect information now with our drones and with the photography of that. And you can see the fracking chemicals, not the fracking, but the drilling compounds and chemicals coming out, discoloring the water and killing the vegetation already. And so that information is going to be very important in Wisconsin because they have the same glacial terrain that we have. And they can see that all the bullshit lies that people stood up and said you can't do it because this is going to happen aren't going to play the second time. And there's other factors that are going on. Enbridge is trying to, let me think of how you say this now.
It's called counterinsurgency?
No, yeah,
Oh,
no, the one where they want to redo the value of their pipeline. I can't think of the right term. They want to change the depreciation schedule of their new pipelines. They want them all like depreciated in 10 years instead of 30 or 40 years. Well, that tells us they don't plan on being around much more than 10 years. So what kind of
it cleaned up now?
Yeah, and they're using the law to do this. If you saw a while back also, they were able to use the law to get a bunch of money from the old pipelines because Minnesota wasn't taxing the pipeline throughput. They had some kind of other goofy deal. And so as a result, Enbridge went and sued the state in about, 13 counties, and they won something like $25 million overpayment from the Minnesota Department of Revenue. Now, how beholden are those counties? The one county in Clearbrook, the amount of money that they owe is more than their annual budget. So they came down to all the hearings to speak bad against us. We want the pipeline. We want the job. We don't care. Clearbrook blew up in 2007 and 2 people were killed. The largest oil spill in North America in the United States happened in 1991 in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Cohasset, where they want to put that plant. They had an oil spill back in 2002. Husky, you saw that one. You guys are young, but you saw that on TV. That one blew up and stayed on fire for a while. These things happen all the time. But when you go to these nice little meetings with all the attorneys in suits, no problems. We're professionals. We know what we're doing. They ain't. They're bullshit artists. They're con artists. Winona will tell you they're taking our stuff. Now, I'm going to tell you one last piece about this, and I'm probably going to do rights of fish at some point. But Minnesota has degraded our resources to where they're at a tipping point. People don't understand what the tipping points are because you can't see them. You have to be engaged in the resources. And so in 2015, NPR did a story on Lake Mille Lacs, and they said that Mille Lacs can never fully recover from climate change. And it's partially because it's a shallow lake. One of the other problems is they don't have the primary food source for walleye in abundance or for the muskie, and it's called the tulipy. And the tulipy is just a little fish. It usually gets to about 2 pounds, but it's the little cousin to the big whitefish. And these are omega-3 fish. These are really good fish. They're migratory fish. They go up and down the rivers normally, but they've all been dammed off. And so in that article, it said that there are 173 tulipy refuge lakes left in Minnesota. And we got 18,000 lakes, and there's 173 lakes where they're keeping a guard on what they call the butter sticks or cheeseburgers for the walleye and for the muskie. Now, I'm going to tell you, without even seeing a list of those waters, I'm going to bet 2/3 are on our reservations or old reservations because we're the people of the falls. We knew where the fish were. That's where our reservations are, and that's why we got pushed off of them, because of those kinds of resources. So we're still going back after them, but we got to save the planet because resources aren't any good if you can't eat or breathe. It's a very weird game that we're in. You know, there isn't much time. So, did I miss anything, Winona?
Yeah, I just want to give folks a chance to ask
Yep.
questions they have.
Me or Winona. Winona's really the star. I'm just, you know.
No, he's my lawyer.
You can direct any tough questions.
Yeah, ask him the tough questions.
Yeah. It's late Friday, so you know we've probably had a long week. We don't have much for weekends either. So, but that's just how the story goes right now. Go ahead. Questions even from the audience. I can hear you. Winona can hear you. I know he's being nice and setting up a mic, seeing if you're that brave. You don't have to be that brave. You're attorneys. Come on, you want to, you know, you're going to have to go in the courtroom. Yeah. That's what the Sauk Seattle tribe is using against the city of Seattle in reality. They've got 3 dams, hydroelectric, and they don't have any fish pathways. And they're coming up for a new FERC license in about 4 years. And so they're going to use their federal rights against that federal permit being issued until Seattle does something. And so it's in Seattle's interest to get it ahead of time. So that's one of them already. The Yurok tribe, they're doing something similar, but they're doing the rights of the river, of the Klamath River, because it's got low flow and a lot of pollution.
4 dams.
Yeah, yeah. And so for me, you know, again, coming back to the river, I can see the wild rice as an indicator species. I can see the salmon in the river as an indicator species. But if you got to go and measure all the time and then say, hey, you're, you know, 7 millionths over or whatever those things are, it's hard to make people cooperate. But if you've got the dead fish, I think it's a lot easier. And the Klamath, they got the dead fish. That's terrible. You know, it's the same thing up there in Seattle. And so those people, I mean, it's distressing. I mean, they're not, you know, we look at all of our world as our relations. And so rights of fish, it's just one more relative. When you see that your relatives can't live, it's pretty distressing. We're lucky here. We got a lot of resources. But
Yeah, our land, I mean, you know, in the big picture, I think people know this. It's like indigenous people are about 4% of the world's land, but 75% of the world's biodiversity, right? You know, and so the North is what you're seeing, and we still have life. You know, that's why we're fighting for it, you know? And there's a lot of places that don't have as much life as we do.
yeah, so when you think about food security, food sovereignty, you know, if we don't engage for a bunch of reasons, even if they're selfish ones for clean water, clean air for ourselves, you know, we don't want the water rising on the coast at 2 or 3 feet and everybody wondering, well, let's see, where is the fresh water and the fish and the animals to hunt and eat? They're all right here. We don't want to see a bunch more neighbors. You know, we like it up north a little more peaceful and stuff. We like you guys being down here. You know?
You know, I realized I didn't explain this. Those circles are the are the kill zones. That's where they're going to get the wood from.
Right.
Because they're going to get it within 100 miles of their plant.
Huber, that mill, they say they're going to cut trees within a 100-mile radius. Now, that's easy to do if you're the only timber mill in Minnesota when you look at that map. Problem is there's other existing timber mills. Bemidji has one, and they want a full EIS. They're wondering, are you going to take our trees too? What about the other timber mills? Are we in competition for the trees now against each other, the white people? What is that going to mean? You know, I saw the sign on the way into Grand Rapids, and it's showing deforestation and 2 little bear cubs. Where are they going to go?
Signs go up?
Yeah.
Go team.
Yeah. You know, so it's hard for us to contemplate, you know, what are they going to do? Because I'll tell you, you know, you guys would have to show you pictures. They clear cut Minnesota 100 years ago. It was all stumps. When they ran out of trees off reservation from all the millions of acres we sold them, they wanted the trees on our reservations because you could see them. And they figured out ways to get them too. Every time we'd have some other treaty or act of Congress, they changed the rules. That's who I learned from. I've changed the rules. You know?
Just up here, there's a person up there.
Hey, yep. Well, there's sticking points. Some of those things I don't always like to talk about, but I'll talk about them a little bit. One of the good things about the Mille Lacs decision in 1999 and the 10 years before it, and going back through the treaties when I talked a little bit about the 25 and 26 and the Trade and Intercourse Act and then the 1837 treaty with wild rice. The very next treaty, 1842, northern Wisconsin, the bottom side of Lake Superior where all the copper was. They realized that we were entrepreneurs too. And giving us alcohol didn't make us more agreeable. In fact, we might be fighting and trying to one-up each other. And so when you read the 1842 treaty, it talks about removing all the disdain and discomfort and people arguing. And it's because they've been trying to get stuff from us in ways that weren't productive for them. And so what they said was that all of the lands, and we tried to tell them this at the beginning, all of the lands across from Michigan to North Dakota by us are held in common. That's what they said in that treaty. All the lands that had been ceded were held in common, and the lands yet to be ceded. And so it meant that we all had the same exact rights across about 800 miles and a couple of 100 miles north and south. And so you don't have to fight over that stuff. We weren't pushed into a spot like the West Coast a lot of times in a lot of tribes and things like that. And so we don't have that problem. But we have a similar problem, and I'll just talk about it a little bit because it's kind of goofy and it comes back to capitalism and greed, and it affects all of us, even in Indian country. So these are my own perceptions. Someone else could argue about it. A few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I got to go back farther now. 1988, was it 88? 1988, gaming came to Minnesota. That's when they legalized casinos. And so there were a number of casinos created here in Minnesota. We must have 17 or 18 now, but Mille Lacs was one of them. There was some in Wisconsin that started popping up. And the casinos, everybody does a business plan and who they're marketing to and their clientele. Well, if you put another casino within 30, 40 miles, it's like the trees. Those are my trees. Those are my people that are going to bring their money to my casino. And so they started working with this guy named Jack Abramoff in D.C. to not let other Indian tribes have casinos. Now that is disgusting for poor Indian tribes, to have other Indian tribes that are affluent stopping that from happening. So that happened. Now we're, 40 years later, the Mille Lacs decision is 20 years old. And now we're in the 55. Our treaty's kind of goofed up because we didn't write it. We'll just say some non-Indians were the drafters. And so after the series of treaties, the 37 says we retain the right to hunt, fish, and gather wild rice in the land, rivers, and waters, or lakes, being ceded. 54 says we retain the right to hunt, fish, and gather. 55 says we relinquish all right, title, and interest. The state thought that meant we gave everything up, but that's not what the Supreme Court said, because they looked at the 55 because the state was using the 55 against the rest of the Chippewa. And they said, everybody has these rights in common, essentially, and included in the 55. But the state still wants to hold it against us. But in the 54, they've been exercising their rights since 30 years ago now. And the funny thing is that was even before the Mille Lacs decision. And so, and this is just another trick of law I'll talk about for a second because you talk about agreement and different things. So Minnesota started paying the three bands of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe in the 1854 territory approximately $7 million a year, not to exercise their off-reservation commercial rights to hunt, fish, and gather. Now that's pretty huge stuff. $7 million might be okay. It's okay. And so what we did in the 1855 Treaty Authority was we adopted the same exact code that the 1854 Treaty Authority was using because Minnesota was giving them $5 or $7.5 million a year. We're doing it for free. They can't say our code's bad. They're getting it for free, and it's the same exact code. But they still don't want to say that we have that right. And they're trying to figure this out. And because of the struggles in Aiken County and Wadena, it's all going to get straightened out. Because there are people who are so redneck, they think they can still stop us. And so as they actively stop through their county attorneys who went to law school too, they're going to find out that they don't have the rights that they think they do, and they're going to find out that I understand more about their rights. And I'm starting to talk about res judicata and collateral estoppel because we're part of the Chippewas of the Mississippi. We weren't in the litigation from Mille Lacs because we we were under oppression. Our tribal leaders were going to jail and different things at Whitehorse and Leech Lake. So they were diverting our funds that could have been used for better purposes. There's a lot of sad things that happen. And so, you know, we're still in that struggle, but we still go out and defend our rights. We still go out and post our seasons, and we still go out and harvest, you know, and we're going to prevail. But it's not easy. It's not cheap. You go to a reservation, any reservation, there's 100 problems. I've been a tribal attorney. Nobody has time to work on what I'm working on, or I wouldn't exist. Nobody has time to work on what Winona's working on, or she wouldn't exist. We're anomalies because there's a void of things that can be done fairly easily if you understand how your rights work. But if you've got a bazillion problems and not enough money, it doesn't matter about those rights. You got to solve those bazillion problems. And they're your voters. You know?
I want to just add in a couple things. So I spent 5 months last year living on the Shell River off the reservation in the 55 treaty territory. It actually was great. It was great. Did you get that? How much I liked it, right? Except for the cops and the police and the repression and little stuff that messed up my day to day. But what I was going to say is that Frank is talking about the 55 treaty. And then I was like, well, where were we in 1856? Oh, that's right. We were still living where we were living in 1855. Our reservation wasn't created until 1867. You know, so we was all roaming in our usual and accustomed places, continuing ricing and, you know, in every location, you know. And so my point is like that the Indian understanding retained that territory. We continued until this day, because there are, you know, at my father, my grandfather, they were all charged with different hunting and fishing violations. Indians have been charged off reservation for, you know, my whole life, because we just continued to do what we were instructed to do by our creators, to continue fishing and hunting on the Crow Wing and the Shell and, you know, places that we know. And so that's the first thing I want to say. Second thing I want to say is that I'm really glad to be here with the lawyers. And I just want to say social movements need lawyers, and lawyers need social movements. Because you guys can be brilliant as heck, but if nobody knows about it and there's not a face besides your cute faces as lawyers, you know. So really just remember that it's so important to be part of the, you know, change doesn't happen from, you know, one magical thing, right? It happens because of a lot of factors. And we're looking at reading this book called Emergent Strategy. I don't know if any of you have read, but it's a great book. But anyway, my point is that that's how change happens. There's not like a fairy that makes it, but it's a combination. So anyway.
And just one last piece here, and close up if you're trying to, you got somebody who wants to say something. But as an attorney, the path is really odd. And so I've worked at legal services on the reservation for Whitehorse, Leech Lake, Red Lake. I've worked with the public defense. Those are the poorest people who can't even defend themselves. And the band hardly shows up to defend. But once you start realizing what some of those rights are, that's how they get changed. And so in 1997, Minnesota finally understood that they didn't have the right to regulate our real simple, basic conduct, what we call civil regulatory on reservation. You know, that was driving without a driver's license, driving without a safety belt, no child restraint device. And the Supreme Court finally acknowledged that they didn't have that kind of authority over us on reservation. You know, it took till 1997. You know, we've only had our tribal courts because of that since then. Because then they said, oh, you Indians you can regulate yourselves on the reservation. You know, otherwise they come in with guns and badges. And that is their primary MO. I mean, the pipeline, that's a little more flagrant. You know, there's millions of dollars. And we're going to go after that too, because I've been enforcing the law too. You know, and I think I've been rightly enforcing the law against lawbreakers. So it's going to get interesting. That's the saddest part. There's still stuff at Standing Rock that's going through litigation. We're going to be going through litigation for a long time. Case just came up 3 weeks ago for a person who had an eye socket blown out by the law enforcement at Standing Rock for civil rights violation. The wheels of justice don't even turn sometimes.
But we haven't even filed our constitutional cases, right? Mara has not filed the constitutional cases, like how many people's rights were violated.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a bunch coming up. Mm-hmm. And we warned law enforcement along the way ahead of time. You know, But law enforcement, those guys didn't go to law school.
No, they didn't.
They think they did. The gun and badge makes them a little bolder. But it's really interesting. Go ahead, John. Where are we at?
I think we're going to wrap up here, but before we do, I just wanted to see if there are folks that are interested in getting more involved and volunteering. You talked about the important work that's being done. How can they get involved?
Oh, that'd be great.
That's another hour discussion, John.
No, but if you just contact us at Honor the Earth, you can. Winona Leduc at honorearth.org. And we have, I think you're right. We have like 4 or 5 lawyers now, and more coming because we've expanded. Some people would go lick their wounds, but I'm like, no, let's just go after Huber, go after because it's not right what they're doing. And the water protectors and the water deserves people to stand up for it, So we're expanding our legal challenges and our work, and Frank needs help.
Winona needs help.
Thank you all, though, for having us. We really appreciated the opportunity to talk to you, and we do hope you come up. The summer is nice. It's very nice in the north. Camping on the Shell is very good. I've said that like 5 times, right? Just to show you, as you notice, DNR, the state did say that Indian people can now go into state parks without paying a permit cost, right? DNR came to see me last week. I don't know if I told you that. Itasca, the regional director, came down to see me and said, I asked him for the campground receipts from the Shell River campground because we filled the campground, right? It was a public campground. It was like 5 times bigger than any year in the past 5. He said, what's your plans? I said, we're going to go back camping. He was like, I said, nobody else does. But so Shell City Campground will be there. Off and on. We're holding a couple of gatherings, but we did buy a bunch of land right next to it so we could just continue our lives off the res.
Right, and so we are methodical in that sense. We have land in different places ahead of time so that we're not trespassing and things like that. There's room by the river in Wisconsin, or by the lake. There's plenty of room out there. We'll be all the way out to Mackinac.
Mm-hmm. We'll be busy. Come join us.
Yeah.
Summer's nice in the north.
Yep.
They can all look at that map.
You can hear me. Okay. I just want to say thank you again to our keynote speakers and to all of our speakers today. It was a great way to end such a series of important lectures and panels. I want to thank again our law school support staff, our journal staff, John, Eric, and Hosher. This could not have happened without you, so thank you very much. And thank you all for attending. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.